Welcome, and thank you for trusting us with this deep dive. Our mission today is pretty unusual. We're examining a really grim chronicle of collapse.
We are.
Specifically, the devastating 1336 IC Cataclysm. We're going to forensically track the immediate and just terrifying consequences for the major power players who are caught up in it all.
And this isn't your typical disaster analysis, you know. The source material is crystal clear on this point. The cataclysm was not an accident of nature. It wasn't some random calamity.
Right.
We're treating these accounts as verifiable historical documentation, and we're charting not just the events, but the internal drives, the political fault lines, and, the deep hidden motivations that really paved the way for all this.
Yeah, the choices.
Exactly. The choices made by kings, by generals, by zealots, all in the face of annihilation. And those choices, they defined their horrifying fates.
The narrative we've managed to synthesize reveals a world just, altered in an instant. And it was all driven entirely by one individual's malignant ambition. Tasuni, who was one of the most immediate chroniclers of the age, he observes that the devastation was, and I'm quoting here, far too rich with intention.
Rich with intention.
So we have to start there then, with the mind that conceived of this systemic destruction. We have to start with Malachi.
You do.
So let's unpack Malachi's core ideology. Because this wasn't just madness, was it? This was a deeply held, however perverse, philosophical view of existence.
It was a worldview, a terrifying one. The cataclysm was built on a foundational belief about the planet itself.
Okay.
Tasuni talks about creation, saying that beneath our feet, the very structure of the world shivers and writhes.
Alive.
It's alive, and it's unhappy. It sees our current reality as this imperfect, oppressive shell, the chrysalis, basically, and it's yearning for this radical, fundamental shift, a transformation that only the beast can excite.
So he saw himself as a liberator, in a way, liberating the world from its current form.
In the most twisted sense, yes. And we have to emphasize this. Malachi did not view the cataclysm as like a regrettable side effect of his power struggle. He saw the utter devastation of the Eternal Empire as a necessary act.
A prerequisite.
A prerequisite for his actual cosmic goal. The destruction had a quality of malice, a fingerprint of design, which Tasuni confirms was steeped in satisfaction.
That concept, satisfied devastation,
Yeah.
that is just chilling. He wasn't simply unleashing a force, he was conducting an experiment and enjoying the results.
Absolutely. The entire catastrophe was orchestrated for one singular, explicit, strategic reason: to position himself, physically and spiritually, within the black heart of the beast.
So it's not about worship, it's not servitude.
No, not at all. This was a calculated, ultimate power grab. It was about placing Malachi in the driver's seat for a fundamental rewrite of reality.
And he secured the role he wanted then, to become the hands and eyes, the voice and mind of the beast itself. The cataclysm, it was just the proof of concept, a demonstration of his control over these initial forces of chaos. But what was the intended application of this power? What did he actually want to create?
The sources define his terrifyingly ambitious goal as universal transmogrification.
Universal transmogrification.
Yeah. And while Pitaras and Vanja defined this functionally as the power to change the world into anything you like, the philosophical terror of that concept is, it's often missed. This is Malachi's greatest work, an act of invention like none other.
So it's not about temporary ruin. This is about establishing a new, stable, yet horrifying reality.
A new set of rules, a new physics.
So if he achieved this, if he awakened the beast, and the initial effects suggest he got terrifyingly close, what does that new world even look like? We have to spend time on what universal truly implies here. If he can change the world into anything, this is beyond chaos. It's a new, deeply malevolent order.
Piety confirms this chilling design. She says Malachi is harnessing all that the beast is and will be to destroy the current world and, quote, forge it anew in the divine image of nightmare.
The divine image of nightmare. The key word there is divine, isn't it? He believes he is creating a higher, purer form of existence, even if it's built from pure psychological horror.
He sees it as an ascension.
And here's where we get to the truly disturbing detail. The one that makes this fate so much worse than just being annihilated. The sources are very, very specific. The beast is not death. How do we interpret that distinction?
That is the ultimate twist of the knife right there. Oblivion would be a mercy.
Yeah.
Instead, life will continue, but it will be a life like nothing we have seen before, forged entirely in that terrifying, twisted reflection of divinity. It is perpetual, horrifying existence, not rest, not salvation.
It's a future that, You couldn't even recognize it. The rules of biology, physics, emotion, all just rewritten by a malevolent creator.
And that spiritual corruption was immediate and pervasive. It affected the laws of nature itself. The Cataclysm was just Act 1. It left this trail of decay that implies the rewrite process has already begun.
So the proof is right there in the immediate aftermath.
Precisely. The immediate spiritual consequence was that nothing is immune to the nightmare's twisted influence. The fallout confirms this radical change in existential rules. The dead lingered, and the living began to rot.
That's not a natural disaster. That's not an earthquake.
No, that is the early stage of a hostile, systemic rewrite of reality. It's a proof of concept for the universal transmogrification that's supposed to follow.
So if the Cataclysm was Malachi's mechanism engaging, Sarn, the capital of the Eternal Empire, that was ground zero, the first most visceral stage.
It was, and we have these just chilling eyewitness accounts from survivors like Victorio and Siosa. They give us this incredible visceral sense of the speed and the tangible effects.
And we're not talking about days of collapse here.
No.
We're talking about the entire capital falling in the course of an hour, no more.
An hour. That speed suggests an immediate, devastating application of the Cataclysm's power. It hit the gemling heart of the Empire like a catastrophic, instantaneous wave.
It had to be supernatural.
Siosa, who was a Karui and had seen fierce tempests back in Gamakanui, he explicitly states, "There was nothing natural about the Cataclysm. The events he describes are pure, rapid, supernatural horror tailored specifically for that city."
He describes the initial environmental shift with this level of dread that it is. It suggests the world itself turned malignant. A tempest raged down from the mountains, throwing the city into midday darkness. And Victorio notes the sun became an orb of blood. The atmosphere itself was saturated with suffering. The air didn't just smell bad, it reeked of anguish.
And that physical environment, it perfectly reflected the immediate psychological warfare. This wasn't just buildings falling. The nightmare was attacking the minds of the citizens directly.
Yeah. Siosa saw formerly rational men in the Empire instantly break. He says they started to jabber and slaver and slaughter each other.
Just instantaneous madness.
Victoria's account, it really details the cognitive toll. It suggests that the ability to reason, to think, became a primary target of the attack. He writes, "Thinking burns." He sees horror clawing at his mind, and he admits to envying the mute corpses at his feet. In that single hour, rational thought became an active, debilitating torture. The very capacity for human reflection was weaponized against them.
And that psychological horror, it manifested in these grotesque, rapid physical mutations.
Right.
Victoria's chilling account of the man who served him coffee it's the single most terrifying depiction of this process. The man writhes on the floor, ranting about unseen visions.
And then the detail.
And then the detail that just defines the horror. Writhing red tentacles grow from his face as if his eyes had been seeds waiting to sprout. This is the immediate, fatal physical manifestation of the nightmare. A rapid, fatal mutation that leaves the victim dead, silent, and horrifically altered. It's the signal of a system-wide biological corruption.
So while many of the common citizens were either driven mad or instantly mutated, the elite, the surviving Gemling patrons, they were subjected to a very targeted, visible transformation.
Was it specific to them?
It seems like their powerful gems, the very things designed for eternal life, acted as conduits for the nightmare.
They absolutely did. Their corruption was tailored to their nature. Their skin instantly shriveled and grayed to the hue of necrosis. Their gems, the source of their power, they flared with this unholy luster.
And the most telling psychological mark.
Their eyes. They turned black as hatred. They weren't just driven mad. Their physical and spiritual core was instantly rebooted as a monster. Their power turned against them.
We even get a specific, terrifying case study in Trinian, the Gemling Intellectus Prime.
The pinnacle of their intellectual achievement.
Exactly. And he was engulfed by the radiance of his own cranial gem. But instead of granting wisdom, it acted like a spiritual fire. The source says he withered like a grape in the sun, shrinking into a thing of desiccation and famishment.
That imagery, it captures the complete reversal of what Gemlings represented. Power, eternal life, refinement, all of it inverted into instant dried-out hunger and endless craving.
And this rapid transformation, it leads directly to the core problem of Sarn today, the Undying.
Cheetah's Gemlings, the formidable legionnaires, they still rule the fallen city, but now they're called the Undying.
Yeah, Marimoa, the Karui elder, he connects their origin directly to the Cataclysm. He notes it turned the legionnaire into a mindless man of undeath.
They're more than just ghosts. Captain Fairgraves calls them a foul parody of humanity. But their most terrifying characteristic is just their persistence. Sarn has been locked in this state for centuries.
They're disturbingly resilient.
Incredibly. Marimoa confirms that the Undying have existed for hundreds of years and are likely to survive for hundreds more if they aren't actively sought out and destroyed.
So they're not immortal in the traditional sense. They can be killed.
They can, but the chroniclers stress this is with some difficulty. They are effectively a resilient, self-perpetuating undead monarchy. They're fueled by the once elite military force of the Empire, and they're living proof that Malachai's immediate spiritual influence endured long, long past that first hour.
Before we move on from Sarn, we have to look at this link, the one between the Empire's technology and this instant corruption. Clarissa, one of the few knowledgeable survivors, she makes an observation about the city's living sculptures.
The ones animated by gemling artifice.
Yeah. She points to the use of thermetic sulfite, a byproduct of gem refining that Chitus's sculptors use to soften their materials.
And this is a crucial technical detail. Thermetic sulfite, a specific chemical byproduct of the complex gem refining process, was intrinsic to the Empire's architecture and art.
So Clarissa is suggesting that the very materials and processes of the Gemling Empire were intrinsically linked to the mechanism of the Cataclysm.
I think that's exactly what she's suggesting.
So we can interpret this to mean that the Gemling technological infrastructure acted as a massive spiritual conductor for the nightmare.
Yes. It chemically or maybe spiritually primed Sarn to receive that instantaneous and total corruption. This provides a structural, almost technical reason why the corruption in the capital was so swift and utterly complete, whereas other areas experienced different stages of decay.
So the Empire, in its pursuit of eternal power through gems, essentially built the very chemical and spiritual infrastructure necessary for its own instant catastrophic failure.
They built their own funeral pyre.
Okay, so moving beyond the sheer chaos of Sarn, we see the Cataclysm claiming other military and political leaders, but in vastly different, more nuanced ways.
Right. And these different fates, they reveal that the nightmare, it tailors its corruption to the psychological weakness or strength of the individual.
It's not one size fits all.
Not at all. We have 3 distinct stages of high-level corruption and 1 remarkable instance of survival to compare. Let's start with General Adis.
Okay.
He and his elite legionnaires, they sought practical military refuge in the Highgate refinery during the Cataclysm's first moments. They relied on their discipline.
And that choice relying on discipline over, say, faith or technology, it resulted in a very different outcome than the madness in Sarn.
A very different outcome. Sin, who studies these forces, he analyzed their possible fate. He predicted they would become creatures of darkest discipline.
Note the stark contrast to Sarn's jabbering and slavering.
Exactly. Adis's men were strong in health and life, and the corruption, therefore, made them even stronger in corruption and death. This isn't chaos. This is hyper-controlled, corrupted strength.
So if the Undying are mindless shuffling ghouls, Adis's forces are highly organized instruments of the nightmare.
Potentially much more dangerous because they retain a terrifying tactical cohesion.
So what does that darkest discipline look like in application? It implies their corruption is a refinement of their existing military nature, a terrifying effectiveness in service to the beast's agenda.
I think so. They are essentially living proof that corruption can enhance, not just destroy, military prowess.
It really speaks to Malachai's sophistication, doesn't it? The nightmare doesn't just dismantle, it exploits existing structures.
It does. In Adis's case, it took their formidable military training and their loyalty, and it just redirected it towards a malignant purpose. It made them instruments of war whose only motivation is conquest and servitude to the deepest darkness, now hyper-controlled by a corrupted will.
Now let's turn to Vol, a figure whose fate is just marked by immense self-recrimination and the tragedy of zealotry. He was famously called Vol the Pure.
But Lady Dalla brands him Lol the Murderer.
And his disaster wasn't a physical corruption in that first hour. It was a moral and psychological one that preceded the Cataclysm.
And this is a perfect illustration of how internal ambition paved the way for cosmic horror. Diala states it flatly. While Malachi was the hand that led to the rapture, it was Vol's words that put me there.
So Vol's lust for a fundamental clean purity blinded him.
Completely. It allowed Malachi to manipulate him into murdering an emperor and, in effect, destroying the entire empire. He thought he was destroying the beast. He only provided the necessary sacrifice.
We have his direct confession too, and it details the crushing weight of his failure. He admits, I lied to myself, Blinded by my lust for purity, I place my faith in the most corrupt of men.
And then he has to watch the consequence firsthand. His legion melts, their flesh dying, only to rise again as a tide of mortal death and eternal damnation.
His consequence is arguably the most psychologically torturous fate of all the leaders we see.
It has to be. Tsuni confirms that Vol now wanders the desiccation, tortured equally by the pervasive nightmare and by the crushing, unending weight of his personal catastrophic failure. He is trapped by his own mistake forever.
But his legacy continues, not just in his suffering, but in his followers, the Unmen.
Right. Oyun confirms their terrifying persistence. She notes they still thirst for conquest even after being horribly maimed and reduced to these fleshless entities.
So if we compare the undying, the mindless men of undeath, the physical rot, to the Unmen, the fleshless, driven zealots, we see the difference between immediate physical corruption and a spiritual tenacity that's been corrupted.
That's a great way to put it. The Unmen retain a form of terrible, unquenchable will, the will to conquer, even after their physical form is destroyed. Vol's zealotry created a perpetual, agony-fueled war machine, the ultimate tragic irony.
Okay, so from there we shift to the Gemling Queen, Lady Diala, who she stands out as the single greatest anomaly in this entire chronicle of corruption.
She's the big question mark.
She was at the very epicenter of Gemling power and the Rapture, yet she endured the Cataclysm entirely.
She challenges the entire premise of Malachi's victory. Gregor the Templar, he asks the essential question that underlies all of our source analysis. How did she survive? Why is she not one of the undying?
She should have been the first to fall, based on everything we know about Sarn and the Gemlings.
Absolutely. Her mere existence suggests that Malachi's universal transmogrification has a weakness, or at least a loophole large enough for a person to crawl through.
The Templar reinforces this by suggesting that Diala's survival, possibly linked to her position within or near the Solaris Temple, implies that something eternal remains in this empire.
So if the Gemlings were susceptible because of the thaumatic sulfite infrastructure, and Vol was susceptible because of his internal self-deception,
then Diala's endurance has to be interpreted as a form of resistance.
yes, her survival challenges the idea that corruption is inevitable. It suggests that a connection to a different powerful force, this concept of the eternal, can successfully challenge or reject the influence of the nightmare.
So structurally, she is the remaining light,
Yeah.
the single point of failure in Malachi's perfect system of devastation.
She is. And it sets up the possibility that resistance to the Cataclysm isn't about military might, which failed Adis and Vol, but about a kind of spiritual purity or alignment with a force Malachi could not master.
Now we turn to, well, perhaps the most complex and agonizing chronicle in all the sources, the fate of the Karui people and their king, Callum.
This one it's a true tragedy.
Their story begins after the Purity Rebellion. Callum, driven by this completely justified rage, he blockaded Oriath and was planning an invasion. Clarissa confirms that contact was lost right after the Cataclysm hit the mainland.
So the Karui, while they were geographically distant, they did not escape the immediate spiritual and environmental siege of the nightmare.
Not at all.
The initial phase of that siege was psychological and spiritual. The documents from Lavianga's weathered carvings, they paint a picture of internal warfare that targeted the core identity of a warrior culture.
They weren't fighting armies.
No, they were fighting the weather, their own dreams, and eventually their own dead.
So describe the conditions for us.
They faced these black storms of rage and hatred descending from the north. But the deepest infection came from the wind itself. It carried a restless spirit that bred intense melancholy and madness, and it would weave tales of misdeed directly into their dreams.
So it's an insidious corruption.
It drove brothers to murder each other. A warrior culture defined by strength was paralyzed by nightmares and driven to commit malefaction against their own kin. Then the physical corruption followed. Animals suffered first, their eyes filling with a hatred beyond instinct.
And then, the ultimate tragedy that signaled the depth of the spiritual infection. The corruption reached their children. Lavianga records the grim day the firstborn of the kingdom of Kaum was buried this day. The nightmare was targeting the future of the Karui people.
This systemic attack, it also violated their most sacred cultural norms. The Karui traditionally revere their dead in a process that transforms them into the remembered, who act as ancestral guardians.
Right.
But the Cataclysm caused the very earth of Rayclass to reject the dead. The Black Spirit, the source of this corruption, it reached into the ground and raised their slain imperial foes, driving them to fight beyond the end, rotted tooth and jagged nail.
But the most profound violation, the one that broke the Karowe way, was that their own remembered joined the cursed ranks.
Yes, they were forced to fight their own ancestors.
Imagine that.
This forced Kaom into an unthinkable foundational violation. He commanded his people to destroy their own remembered with axe and fire.
Which meant actively defying and bearing the ire of the ancestors, the most fundamental cultural sin.
All for the physical survival of the living. Kaom was the only figure with the authority and the desperate courage to command it. But the price was spiritual ruin for the entire nation.
And the desperation just peaked when they couldn't pacify the land's spirit. The sources confirm that Kaom led his people back to the oldest of rituals.
Which was a horrifying act of spiritual cannibalism. A feast of heart and mind, muscle and marrow, consumed in the fire and rock of the angry land.
This was an act of profound cultural trauma, done only in the most extreme, desperate times, banking entirely on the trust they placed in their king to save them.
And this ritual, which was intended to pacify the earth, was the turning point. It offered the nightmare its ultimate opening for deception.
His intentions were exploited.
Completely. He took his 500 mightiest warriors inland to find the source of the crippling nightmares, and he was driven by a vision and a dream, an offering from the deity Tukahama. He believed he just needed to accept it.
But the documents are. They're damningly clear on the truth of that vision.
They are. Oyun, one of the few who survived the collapse that followed, confirms that Kaom and his 500 elite warriors entered the mines and never returned. The vision was a direct, targeted deception by the Black Spirit,
who Kaom later identifies as Kitava. He believed Kitava had severed the Karowe from their ancestors.
And Kaom, blinded by this desire to restore the Karowe way and desperate to defeat Kitava, he led his 500 finest into the heart of Reklast. There, the entity posing as Tukahama demanded a sacrifice.
And Kaom's response was just a catastrophic act of misplaced loyalty and complete delusion.
He believed he was honoring them with a warrior's death, ensuring their spirits would fight by his side against the true enemy.
And the sheer devastation of this betrayal is quantified so chillingly. Kaom's axe fell 500 times, drinking its fill of Karowe blood. The betrayal was complete, personal, and meticulously documented.
The consequence for him was total internal collapse. The chroniclers note that 500 times Kaom's axe fell and 500 times Kaom's heart splintered. All that remained was a terrible, heartless fury.
And this fury wasn't resistance. It was the final, refined stage of his corruption.
The nightmare had used its sweet whispers to lull him to complete destruction. It manifested his unrequited dreams of conquest in a physical nightmare of molten rage.
He didn't just die. He became a monarch of nightmare. He believed he was founding a new way to fight Kitava, declaring himself the son of Tukahama, gathering forces to march back to glory.
But Oyun confirms the devastating truth. Kaom was conquered by the Black Spirit, and in doing so, he conquered and ultimately destroyed the Karowe way itself.
But we should contrast this tragic, deceptive sacrifice with the decisive leadership of Hiri.
Yes, absolutely. While Kaom was falling victim to this internal spiritual warfare and making his final desperate act of delusion, Hiri, his commander, she made the terrible but pragmatic decision to look past their king's madness and save what remained.
Hiri is the counter-narrative to Kaom's descent, isn't she?
She is. She recognized that Kaom was gone and that the Karowe way had been conquered by corruption. She rejected Kaom's promises of glory and survival through ritualized madness.
She prepared the canoes.
She prepared the canoes, taking the remaining 500 forgotten families and leading them back to Ngamapanari, seeking the dawn. Her action focused on pragmatic retreat and preservation of the living. It provides the only successful immediate counter-narrative to the Cataclysm's systematic pull towards self-destruction.
So the Cataclysm was an event that transpired in an hour, but the source materials make it very clear that the consequences were not neatly contained. The first environmental fallout was immediate and brutal.
Right. It led to a profound period of scarcity. The winter that immediately followed the Cataclysm was especially harsh. It created this intense scarcity where survivors were fighting to the death for the last scraps of bread.
So the transmutation of reality wasn't complete, but it successfully intensified the struggle for the most basic elements of survival among the living.
Exactly. The sources refer to this period as the Long Winter. It further cloaked Reklast in cold winds and snow, but this was a temporary, deceptive blanket.
Because it was masking the continued latent threat?
Yeah, a black heart that lay dormant deep beneath the earth. This implies that the beast is still present. It's merely resting or consolidating its power after its initial successful awakening.
So if the Cataclysm was the first act, the initial destructive wave of universal transmogrification, and the long winter was the intermission, then the continuing rot, the undying legions, the disciplined forces of Adis, and the wandering zealots of Vol, they are the stage setting for the next inevitable phase of corruption.
That's a good way of looking at it.
And this brings our analysis right back to the desperate mission laid out by the earliest chroniclers. Victerio, writing in the last hour of Sauron's fall, he entertained the wildest notion that someone, anyone, might find his memory scraps and understand the nature of the force that claimed his world.
And his final desperate request is the ultimate stake set in motion by Malachi's act. It brings the scope of the Cataclysm back down from the cosmic level to the intensely human level.
It really does.
Victerio's plea is so direct, and it addresses the listener who might find his words. Slay Malachi. Slay him for yourself, or slay him for all the lost citizens of the Empire, but most of all, slay him for Marilyn.
The inclusion of Marilyn. A personal, singular loss amidst the annihilation of an entire empire. That's incredibly powerful.
It is.
Malachi's ambition cost millions, but for Victerio, the Cataclysm is defined by the individual person he cared for most. It confirms that the horror isn't just geopolitical. It's a profound personal tragedy that demands not just survival, but retribution.
And the halting of this universal transmogrification, the sources are unanimous. Malachi must be slain to stop this process from completing itself.
All right, so to wrap this up, we have meticulously detailed the calculated destruction wrought by Malachi, the instantaneous body-horrifying collapse of Sarn, the hyper-controlled conversion of General Adis, the agonizing betrayal and subsequent torture of Vol, and the tragic, deceived sacrifice of King Cum. And the Chronicle, it really shows that the greatest dangers weren't just the black storms or the physical rot. It was the internal corruption, the lure of false promises made under duress or blinding zealotry.
Absolutely.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, in synthesizing this grim history? We've seen how ambition, even when it's cloaked in the desire for purity or survival like Vol's zealotry or Kaom's desperate attempt to restore the Karui way, can lead directly into the hands of a greater nightmare. The world of Rayclast was changed not by some random outside force, but by a malignant, refined vision that exploited specific internal weaknesses. The leaders made their choices, and those choices condemned them to become monarchs of nightmare, creatures of discipline, or perpetually tortured souls.
So the Chronicle of the Cataclysm is, at its core, a comprehensive warning. You have to understand the true nature of the force you're fighting. You have to recognize that it is not simple death, and you must understand your own motivations.
Because if Malachi intended for life to continue, but twisted into the divine image of nightmare, then survival alone is not a victory.
Not even close.
Which brings us back to our single greatest anomaly, Lady Diala. We know the beast is not death, but transformation, and Malachi sought to make that transformation universal.
Right.
So considering the extensive evidence of pervasive corruption, is the survival of Diala, the one person noted as impossible to corrupt, the Gemling Queen, is that proof that humanity's greatest hope lies not in physically resisting the beast's influence, but in maintaining a connection to the something eternal that the Cataclysm fundamentally could not touch?
It's a fascinating question.
If Malachi's nightmare is total, why is the only path forward found in something utterly untainted by his ambition? It's certainly a provocative thought to leave you with, and something to explore as you consider the nature of true power and true corruption.